Hello, everyone, and welcome to another 30 for 30. That's right, 30 days of Springsteen, 30 days in November, every day in November, a new episode where we are discussing a specific Bruce Springsteen release. So, as we continue our journey, I have a new friend on, Anthony.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a privilege. Love to
Yeah,
talk Bruce, and yeah, happy to do it.
thanks. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah. Listen, I did listen to some of your more recent podcasts, Jesse, and I have to tell you, I don't have some of the credentials that the other guests have. First and foremost, I'm a fan. I'm 52, so I've been a fan 40 years. When Born in the USA skyrocketed into the universe is when I caught the spirit, if you will, and been a fan ever since. I'm from New Jersey, seen Bruce probably over 80 times, all within the Northeast here. I've been married 28 plus years. I have three kids from 19 to 26. Like I said, live in New Jersey all my life. I'm primarily been involved in finance from a work, a career perspective. I actually help people. I'm on the recruiting side of things, helping people in finance currently now. And then I've got a little bit of a part-time gig on the church. I pastor a small United Methodist church. Grew up Catholic, United Methodist now. I often call myself a Catholic Methodist, if you will. And some of that will inform, I guess, the things that I see and the way that I approach some of Bruce's music. I think it's a unique perspective because I think I understand where Bruce comes from in terms of a lot of his upbringing as a Catholic and some of the imagery and the way he sees things or doesn't. Love to talk about this album with respect to that as well.
That sounds great. Before we hit record, I told Anthony I want him to come back probably in January or February to do a quote unquote regular episode of Set Lusting Bruce so that we could talk about how he discovered Bruce. I have lots of questions about your faith journey.
Mm.
So they will probably come up a little bit today, but I think there's even more I want to discuss. I was raised Southern Baptist. And I met my wife in 1980, so I was probably about 20, maybe 21.
Uh-huh.
And she said, You got to go to church. You don't have to go to my church, but you got to go to church. And so I had stopped going to my church just out of laziness. And so I started going to mass with her and I ended up converting to Catholicism.
Uh-huh.
So I often say I'm Roman Baptist or Southern Catholic.
There you go.
To you, right?
It's part of, who we are, right? You don't
Absolutely.
really put it aside.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a great introduction. I am looking forward to, we are going to, like I said, in 2025, get you on and we'll talk a little more Bruce in general. But today, Anthony, tell me what album you want to talk about and explain to the audience why you picked this album, please.
Yeah. I think albums pick you sometimes more than you pick them. I've selected Devils and Dust. I think in large part because we had a little bit of an exchange online. I saw that you were doing this, was interested in participating, made mention of kind of my spiritual perspective on things. And I think I might have thrown out there a couple of albums in particular that I think speak to a lot of the spirituality of Bruce. Yeah, I probably mentioned The Rising. I think there's a lot in Letter to You, certainly in terms of life and death. And then Devils and Dust was another one. And so we landed on that one. What I would say about the album in terms of where I place it, if you're a Bruce fan, most of us do this where it's okay, what's our favorite album, right? It might not even be a top 10, but it's my favorite album this week. And that happens all the time, right? Often the album I seem to really resonate with and love the best is the last one I've listened to. This week, I really poured into this one and I've always enjoyed it. In fact, for me, it forms a little bit of a trifecta, a four-fecta now with Nebraska, The Ghost of Tom Joad, Devils and Dust, all more of that quieter solo acoustic work.
Yeah.
Western Stars a little bit too, so that might be the fourth one. But if I put that one aside, those first three, most people would gravitate towards Nebraska. I think I listen to Devils and Dust more so than the other two. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I find that I pull that one off the shelves from a solo acoustic perspective, which I love solo acoustic Bruce more than the other ones. And it's a beautiful album. It really is.
So I'll share my story of Devils and Dust. I was first heard about him in 1980, like everyone else, loved him in 84, with Born in the USA, bought the box set, Tunnel of Love,
Mm.
and then other stuff happened. 89 was when we had our son. We moved to Dallas. In 88, there's just bills and work and bills and work. In 2001, after the towers fell, he did that benefit, and I heard City of Ruins. And then in 2002, I saw him for the first time on the Rising tour.
Yep.
And I've said this multiple times, Anthony. It felt like I walked into a movie halfway through it. And I knew it was a really good movie, but I was missing part of the story because I didn't know as many of the songs as I should have.
Mm.
Um, when Devils and Dust came out, I played it
Mm.
over and over
Yeah.
again. And then when I got a ticket to see him, that was the second show I saw, I felt like I'd done my homework, right? I
Yeah.
was in class, ready to, with my two or three number two pencils, ready to take the test. And he still played a couple songs I didn't know,
Yeah.
but I knew more of them. To me, Devils and Dust will always have a special place in my heart because it's the first new album I had seen after seeing him live.
Yeah, no, I can relate. I won't go into it, but I've got a fondness for Human Touch and Lucky Town, which which again, most people will, a lot of fans will put that into another category and dismiss it. But again, timing. That was when those tours were on, it was the first time in my life I had a little bit of money in a car that I could drive. It's just the time that it came to you in your life. And so that for that reason, you mentioned Better Days before we started here.
Yeah.
Those two albums, particularly that Lucky Town one, have always felt like something special to me.
Were those the first shows or just the first you've been able to
Well,
kind of
so
control your own destiny?
yeah, I saw him on the Born in the USA tour, but again, I was 12, 13. It was my introduction to it where I was like, whoa, like what's
Yeah.
going on here? But I was a kid. When the Tunnel of Love came around, I was at that point a bigger fan. I was 16, couldn't drive, and he didn't play New Jersey for the Tunnel of Love tour. He only played New York. I wasn't in a place where I was going to be going into New York from New Jersey. So it wasn't until then Lucky Town, the Human Touch Lucky Town tour, that I was 20 at this point. I had a little independence. I had four wheels. I had a little bit of money and I could go and go. Yes. Not the very first time I saw him, but the first real
Yeah.
formative adult experiences with Bruce.
And we'll get off this in a minute. Like I said, I know we're going to do a full episode, but I am surprised at the number of people who the other band was their first live experience. It is
Yeah.
more than you would think. I had two or three albums during this 30 for 30 where people reached out and more than one person wanted to talk about an album. And originally I was thinking, no, I've got to be strict. You didn't get it in time. And then I realized, screw it. It's just for fun.
Rules,
Um,
schmools.
yeah, exactly. So I actually had two people sign up for Lucky Town.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that's cool
Yeah.
that two people wanted to talk about not Darkness, not
Right.
Born to Run, but Lucky Town. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, so that was my memory of seeing and finding the album the first time. I remember reading that Ray Charles had a CD, Genius Likes Company, that sold millions of copies via Starbucks.
Mm.
And Bruce was going to have that same kind of deal, but he had a explicit song and
Yeah. Yeah.
Starbucks decided, oh, we can't sell this.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are your memories of the album coming out and everything?
Yeah, I do recall that. And I think some of us were when Reno still gets a reaction every time. And we'll get into that one because, again, if you look past the shock value of it, there's a deeply moving story and a spirituality to it. I think what I remember most vividly is the tour itself. I love seeing Bruce in that setting. I was lucky enough to see him a few times during the Jode tour. And then what I really loved about this tour was that it wasn't just Bruce and guitar. It was the piano, the pump organ, a greater diversity of songs. And what always has attracted me with this album is a mix of it, right? Because it doesn't perfectly fit into that realm of of quiet acoustic Bruce. It has moments like All the Way Home. I mean, Maria's Bed is a song that musically just keeps rising. And I think the instrumentation is often just enough, right? Sometimes with Jode, I'm like, I wish there was a little bit more. Just give me a little synthesizer, give me a little piano, something, right? Whereas I just felt like he musically, it was just enough and a little bit more than Joe to Nebraska, and yet still couched in just that amazing storytelling. I just think there's a lot of people that dismiss work from Bruce after a certain time because there's a bias towards our first initial experiences. But if I listen to this album from a musical storytelling narrative perspective, I would argue it's every bit as good as a Nebraska. So much of his work. It's wonderful songwriting. And if you don't like it as much, hey, to each his own, but I think some of that again is the opposite of recency bias, some sort of old-time bias, right? That the just the power of initial and formative experiences that we think we can't somehow surpass, but yet I would say it's the same about Western Stars. I think it's an absolute brilliant work of art at a very late stage in his career, right? I'd put it up against anything, but some people
Yeah.
I think can't get past Born to Run and Darkness, which are still probably my two favorite albums, by
Yeah.
the way.
When I went to Austin this last tour. He did Dallas, Houston, and then Austin. And I
Yep.
was at all three. So Austin, I went by myself. And in the hotel room afterwards, I recorded a fake Bruce fan. Everything he's done after darkness is shit. And recorded a discussion on it. And I had a lot of fun. One of the early discussions I had on the podcast is um, your choice. You can have everything up to Born in the USA or before on
Yeah.
a tour, or you could have everything after Born in the USA, starting Eternal Love and above. What
Yeah.
selection would you pick? And
Yeah.
most everyone go, oh, the early stuff, right? But I've had a few people go, nope, give me that. I'll hate not hearing Born to Run. I'll
Yeah.
hate that. But to hear these songs that he's done, that would
Yeah.
be a lot of fun.
Listen, I think I would be in that camp. I would say it like this, that I would take the albums from Greetings to Born in the USA when I was age 12 to 40, but now
Yeah.
as a 52-year-old and for the rest of the journey,
Yeah.
I need Tunnel of Love through Letter to You and
Yeah.
whatever we get next.
Yeah.
That's because his music has grown with him and we're all getting older, right?
Yeah.
So listen, Thunder Road will forever be the song that, hey, if I got to take a drive somewhere and roll down some windows, like
Yes.
Alive, Freedom, all of that
Yeah.
stuff, that's youth, right? But
Yeah.
that's not me so much. I want to maintain that spark,
Yeah.
but what I need when I get up and go to work is
Yeah.
Letter to You and Western Stars and so
Yeah.
on.
So I also agree that this is going to sound sacrilegious. I think I would do Devils and Dust, then Nebraska, then Tom Joad.
Mm,
Though I know that's probably, like I said, that's heresy.
sure.
Um, and I think because of the emotional connection that I have to Devils and Dust, there's a little more joy in Devils and Dust.
Mm,
And Nebraska is not about joy.
mm,
When I discovered the Beach Boys, I was buying every album I could find. And when I bought Pet Sounds, I went, this doesn't sound like the Beach Boys. What the hell is this? It now would be probably my favorite album, period.
yeah.
So, yeah, I could see that when people bought Nebraska after the river, they're like, what is this? It is something, and especially now with Warren Zane's book and the film that's coming out, it's getting a lot of touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just piggyback off what you said, just to give our listeners a little bit a reminder if they don't know the origins of Devils and Dust, because to that point where, hey, you're going from the river to Nebraska and then Born in the USA, right? There's musically, there's a great difference there. Um, and Devils and Dust was really, from a writing perspective, born from the Tom Joad tour. Bruce has talked about how it was in the hotels after those shows that he did more writing, and the majority of these songs were formed then. And he considered at that time, hey, let's put these together and maybe get an album out. But I think he intuited that, okay, that Jode was quieter. Now we've got to shift back, maybe, right? And so instead, he sits down and he goes through all his old material, and that results in tracks, which we get in '98. And then, of course, he gets the band together, and you've got that tour, and then the Rising follows, and then it's not until 2005, which after all that band touring, after a rock album like the Rising, that he says, oh, let me revisit those songs. And so he takes the majority of those songs he wrote close to 8 years before that, and then what was a more recent song, I think he wrote it in 2003, the title track, Devils and Dust. And then that forms a record now that we get in 2005, which is that's classic Bruce, right? He writes stuff this good, and we've got to wait 8 years for it. Who knows what we're still waiting for?
Yeah, and you wonder, like, when did he write and record Western Stars?
I think 2000 and I think they've said 2013, and we got it in 19, right? So we
Yeah,
had to wait 6 years on that, as if it wasn't good enough in
yeah. And it's
13
like,
or
yeah,
14.
when you think about Western Stars, Letter to You, you're like, what a 1-2 punch on someone who is on the back end of their career. Just
Yeah,
period. Just
yep,
going. All right, let's go. So, Anthony, I've been giving my guests the choice. We can go track by track, or
yeah,
we can just pick certain tracks to discuss and do a deep dive. Dealer's choice,
yeah.
your call.
Yeah. Let me give you, I was going through it a little bit and thinking about some big themes, right? So I mean, I'll throw that out you, and then maybe we can
Yeah,
just kind
okay.
of walk through a few tracks. And so like, big picture, the album in my mind, and you could say this about a lot of Bruce's work, maybe all of it in some ways, but it's about relationships, and it's about this search for connection, right? There's folks longing for something, there's people that have lost something. So it's the loss of relationships. And then I think the question of, okay, in the midst of loss, like, where does that leave us? What do we do? This fear of loneliness almost, right? And so you see throughout the songs, you see this tension between love and the loss of life, or the loss of love. And then also there's this tension between love and fear, that this idea of fear prominently, I think, in the title track. And so those things just revolve throughout the whole album. Like, what are each of the tracks about, and can I combine some of them thematically, right? And so you've essentially got 5 songs about parents and children, right? Long time coming, you could say, is about parents and children. I mean, I see it as written from a father's perspective just because of Bruce's voice, but both the mom and the dad are involved in that. And there's the children and a future child that's about to be born. And then you've got all these songs about mothers and sons. So you got Black Cowboys, Jesus Was an Only Son, Silver Palomino, and The Hitter, all featuring moms and their sons. And then you've got 5 songs about what I'll say is about lovers, right? About relationships between
Yeah.
two people. You've got All the Way Home, Maria's Bed, Leia, All I'm Thinking About, and Reno, right? There it is. Relationships, lost love, seeking out connection, what to do in the midst of that, right? And that longing is all, to me, again, very spiritual, right? If we get into kind of the lens from which sometimes I look at these things. And so that, to me, that's the big picture, right? And then from there, hey, maybe we get into some of the songs. I think it's interesting because I see Devils and Dust and Madame Morris Banks, they're the bookends, the album, and they both, to me, feel a little different, right? Because what I just mentioned to you about 5 songs about parents and kids, 5 songs about lovers, and then these 2 songs, not quite about either, although there's pieces of it, right? So it's almost like these 2 songs begin and end the album, both of them about life and death, right? The stakes are high in both of those. Devils and Dust, you got a soldier at war. Madame Morris Banks, you've got a migrant trying to cross the border. And then in between, all these different narratives about life, love, and loss, right? And so and then there's certain songs that I think get paired together where you see the voices and the stories of certain people in one song, and you could say, oh, hey, is that? I don't think Bruce writes like consciously, intentionally like that. But oh, hey, that the best example for me is Maria's Bed, and the mention of Maria in Reno. And I look at that and I say, is that the same Maria, right?
Yeah.
At different parts in their relationship. And when you look at it that way, it really brings the record to fullness, right? This is the necessity and the beauty of listening to an album, right? Versus just hitting shuffle. Like now you get these stories and you see how they're connected, right? So it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I had never thought of that before, but the moment you started thinking, when I've got the track list in front of me, I started, oh yeah, these go together and
Yeah.
these go together. There's a lot of songs I love, but Jesus Was an Only Son is just one that when I heard him do it live and he talks the story
Mm,
between,
yeah.
and I heard that both my Southern Baptist and my Catholic roots were just were there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is as This Is Your Sword is a great song on an album that a lot of people feel like it was just haphazard put
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But I think there is a gospel album in Bruce's soul. If he ever wanted to do it, I think he could
Yeah.
do a hell of a, pardon the pun, of a gospel album.
Yeah, I think there's a deep spirituality throughout most, if not all, of his music. You bring up High Hopes, which does seem like a bit of an inconsistent album in some ways, but Heaven's Wall is basically a
Yeah.
gospel song, right? If we go to the Seeger sessions, you've got a lot of music that is African spirituals, basically, right? You've got gospel music there. But yeah, there's a quote, and I wrote it down because I think I've read it in print, but I want to say that he's probably expressed this quote, if not word for word, pretty close when he was working live through Jesus Was an Only Son and pausing right after each verse and talking through it. But the quote goes like this. He says, "Whatever divinity we can lay claim to is hidden in the core of our humanity. When we let our compassion go, we let go of what little claim we have to the divine," right? For me, that's it. If someone were to look at these albums and say, oh, wait a second, this record or that record, it's not spiritual, I would argue with it every time, because I would say you can't separate that notion of divinity and of heaven from that notion of humanity and earth. Like those two things are, they're intertwined. And so we find one within the other, right? I think it was, I always heard it or credit Oprah Winfrey, but she probably took it from someone else. But she said, hey, we're not spiritual beings. We're not human beings trying to be spiritual. We're spiritual beings trying to be human. And then from there, I would go from my own faith perspective, right? And people don't have to share this exactly, but I would invite them to see it this way. If you think about, as Christians, what we say about Jesus is that we say that, hey, that God somehow came down in human form. And that's very mysterious and mystical, and we make a miracle of it. But in pragmatic, practical terms, if we say the same thing about us, that we somehow embody the divine through our humanity, then call it heresy. We're no different than Jesus. And it's our role to embody that. And those things, again, are just, they're intertwined, entangled, right? It's flesh and blood. It's heaven, right? It's all together. And Bruce just plays with that throughout these songs lyrically. You see it, and I just pick it up in Devils and Dust, just the chorus, right? I got God on my side. All right. So this notion of God who is love, however you see that, this guy wants to believe that power, that energy is on his side, but I'm just trying to survive, right? And so right away there's a conflict, because survival and our own self can get in the way of this notion of God and love and the other, right? But what if you do to survive kills the things you love, right? So it kills the God in you if what you do to survive is in conflict with what you think of as God and eternity and love, right? And relationship. And then he says, fear is a powerful thing. It can turn your heart black. You can trust. I often talk in my weekend gig, if you will, that sometimes people put faith and doubt as opposites, but really it's not faith and doubt, it's faith and fear. And the antidote to fear is love. And that's what this guy's wrestling with. It can turn your heart black, you can trust. It'll take your God-filled soul and fill it with devils and dust. It'll make something less than if you allow it. And that's the conflict in that song. And I think that conflict then gets filtered and found in different ways through the rest of the album, which is it's again, I get so excited talking about it. And it's probably like my 10th favorite album. And I'm like, it's incredible.
Yeah, to go back, the scene where he talks about Jesus, there's that little bar in
Oh,
Nazareth,
yes.
right?
That's the one that gets me. Yep.
And can say the preaching on the weekend,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like he's totally forgetting.
Yeah.
And then, and it comes to mind of Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ, which was very controversial at the time. And the idea that it it makes Christ feel more human.
Yeah.
The idea of, and I think that does more about than all my Sunday schools that I heard about Jesus. If this cup passeth away from me, right?
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And then to go back to your devils and dust, it the idea, right, that this soldier, on no matter whose side he's on or
Yeah.
her side, I believe this is a just war, which is totally insane, but that is the history of our world. We do just wars. And I'm not saying some wars aren't just, but the idea I've got God on my side, the things you do, by every time you do this, a little bit of your soul goes away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. You lose, and again, I don't know that this is intentional, but I also don't think that it matters so much. And maybe there is some intention there, but the line in Devils and Dust that gets me, or one of them that gets me, is when he talks about being a long way from home, right? We're a long way from home, Bobby. Home's a long way from us. So you could obviously think about it geographically, but what he's saying is that I'm losing my center, right? Which is home, right? Home is our safe place. Home is salvation. Home is what is peace, right?
Mhm.
And now I'm losing it. And then, of course, the next track is all the way home. And again, am I stretching? I don't know. But when he says, baby, I could walk you all the way home, we could think of that in very literal terms, and we could say, okay, he's going to walk this person home, and in that home there's a bed, and you can make it very sexual. That story works on that level, and it probably exists on that level. But then there's home with respect to the same home that the soldier's talking about, that place of connection and life that he's losing in war. That's the same place that this guy wants to take and share life with this person, right? Home. And that feeling, that connection, that home it's screaming to the narrator in Maria's bed, right? And it's found again in her bed, which you could make a sexual thing, but it's way more than that, right? It's where his soul is alive. And I'll read you a little bit of Maria's bed. He says, been on a barbed wire highway 40 days and nights. And by the way, 40 is a very biblical number.
Very
It's
physical,
right.
yes.
You've got the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. You've got the Noah's flood. You've got Jesus in the wild.
Yeah,
I've been taught that 40 basically is just, it means a long time, right?
right.
And so this guy's been on a barbed wire highway a long time. Like it feels like his entire life, but he isn't complaining and it suits him right. And the only reason he could be in that desert for 40 days is because he's got a sweet soul fever rushing around his head. I'm going to sleep tonight in Maria's bed, right? That's home, right? That relationship is everything to him. And that's why when I then go back to when I see Reno and I'm like, here's a guy that it's not about the sex. He's trying to find something in the sex. And so he goes
Yes.
out and he hires a sex worker, and the way the music changes too is the music sounds almost more dreamlike about halfway through the song, and his mind goes from where he is, right? We talked before about being present. He's no longer present physically there. Instead, he goes back and he remembers his great love, Maria, right? The
Yeah.
one that he shared his bed with, that felt like home to him, right? And I can't help but see those two songs as together, right? One is in this beautiful time, and then the other one is where he's lost, right? He's lost, he's lonely, and he doesn't quite know how to get back there.
And Maria's Bed is such a joyous song. It also reminds me, I don't know if you're a fan of Jason Isbell, but
I know.
so his most famous song is Cover Me Up.
Okay.
And the lyrics are, so girl, leave your boots by the bed. We ain't leaving this room till somebody needs medical help or the magnolias bloom. It's cold in this house and I ain't going out to chop wood, so cover me up and know you're enough to use me for good.
Hmm.
That idea that everything I need is right here in this room,
Yeah.
in this bed.
Yeah.
The idea that he in Maria's bed, he's talking about he's not complaining. The job's hard, but it suits him.
Yeah.
It's good, honest work. I'm happy. And we go all the way back to out in the street where on Monday, when the foreman calls time, I've already got Friday on my mind. Monday through Friday is what I give to the others. And then the weekend,
Yeah.
time in Maria's bed is where I feed my soul, where I
Yeah.
find my happiness. It's just a wonderful song. I love it. When I got to see, as I said, Devils and Dust was my second show. And so he told a lot of stories. I'm also thinking of that VH1 Storyteller came out about the
Mm.
same time, and he told a lot of those same stories
Yeah.
about that. So yeah, this is, and I've never connected the Reno to Maria's bed. Now I'm gonna have to, because the idea, and also I tend to do this, Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer, where it says the hookers on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
And there was a time when I tried to find some comfort there
Mm.
in the idea that often sex workers are portrayed, they're selling a dream, they are selling an illusion,
Yeah.
and that it's the best year had, and
Mm.
it wasn't even close.
Yeah, that's the line, right? That just completes, okay, here's what's
Yeah,
happened, right? He realizes that, he's not home, Maria.
yes.
There was a couple other ones that and again, I only did that this week. I didn't fully flesh it out until I went back to this and listened. But Cowboys is, for me, it might be the best song on the album. I think from a narrative storytelling perspective, it's one of the best stories Bruce has ever told. Um, it would be in close competition for me with Long Time Coming as far as like my favorite songs on the album. Um, but if you take Black Cowboys, again, mother and son, and then Silver Palomino, which if you haven't read a little extra about it, you might not even realize it from just listening to the song. But that Palomino in the song, that horse. So both songs feature horses, right? One's got cowboys on it, and the other one has this boy on it, reminding him, or he's seeing and feeling the presence of his mom who has passed through that silver Palomino, right? In both stories, there's been a break of sorts between the relationship between the mom and the son, and it's a horse that offers some sense of redemption and connection for both of them. And it's interesting. I went back to Bruce's biography before this because I thought, oh, what does he say about Devils and Dust in the biography? And he says very little. Um, in fact, the chapter that is in that area, he talks for maybe half a page about recording these songs. And then he goes on, he talks a fair amount in the rest of the chapter about owning horses. He had just gotten into owning a horse and he's in Colts Neck at this point. And so he talks about horses and his relationship with them, which I thought was interesting. I don't think he was connecting the horses at that point to the album, but here I am listening to the album, and you've got two songs where horses play, a major role in bridging the connection and maintaining what was lost, right? And the reasons that they're lost are different, right? You could say in Black Cowboys that Rainey's Williams' mom, she lets him down in a sense, right? But she's a victim in the midst of these terrible circumstances as well. In fact, In the beginning of the song, Bruce sings and she writes, Rainy, stay at my side, for you are my blessing and you are my pride. It's your love here that keeps my soul alive. Like how many times in this album does Bruce use the word soul? It's your
Yeah.
love that keeps my soul alive. So like for her son is everything. Again, it's that connection, but she could not overcome those dire circumstances. And so she falls prey to drugs and this guy. And at some point, Rainey, whose mom is everything for him, he's got that vision of those black cowboys. And of course, the song ends where he's riding out on the train, right? To meet those dreams, if you will, and to remain connected to his youth and to his dreams. Great stuff. So you've got, again, I see those two songs as connected. We talked about Jesus was the only son a little bit. There you've got that idea of sacrifice. Bruce, you mentioned it before. In the live performance, that part gets me as well when he says, oh, we
Yeah.
could open that little bar. And then he has this line where he says, hey, yeah, we can save the preachers preaching for the weekend. We can open a little bar. And then I can see the sun rise and I can experience the next day and the next day and the next day.
Yeah.
And there becomes the consequences of being an adult where you give something up for something else. And in this case, it's the son that effectively leaves the mother. In Black
Yeah.
Cowboys and Silver Palomino, the mother has left, not of her own accord, but has left the son. Here, it's the son leaving the mother, which is just wonderful. And then the hitter is the other one. The hitter is the other one. It's a son and a mom. And there, a son is basically struggling to make the right choices, right? He's living with his fists, right? So he's living a life of violence and he knocks on his mother's door. And the image you get is that she won't unlatch the door, but she's just watching him in that little sliver of a door. And it's in that place he tells his whole story, but there's this separation, like the connection is lost, like she won't even
Yeah.
open the door. And if I go back to, again, the Catholic imagery, and again, I don't know that Bruce had this in his mind at all, but I think of a confessional, right? Like the hitter there is almost
Yes.
confessing to his mom, and there's this barrier, right? Whether it's the confession box, here it's a door with this little latch, right? And that stands between them, but yet he's got to pour it out and he's got to confess. The tragedy is that he's basically chosen to live at this point a destructive existence, and which kind of connects
Go.
to the song Leia, which is another one that just always gets me. It's beautiful, but in that one he says, I've got a hammer and a fiery lantern, right? And so there's these tools for the journey. And interestingly, both in the line before, he says, I want to build me a house on higher ground. I want to find me a world where love's the only sound. And then he goes on to talk with, I walk this road with a hammer and a fiery lantern. So the hammer could be something that you build a life with, right? But it also could be a destructive force, right? You can also destroy things with a hammer. And then the lantern, you could burn something with a lantern, but it also lights the way, right? These are our two hands, and within them, there's the power to either build or burn, to create or to destroy. In Leia, it's her inspiration, her love that helps him make that right choice. Whereas in the hitter, he can't manage to find his way to the choice that is more generous and would build a life versus burn one down. It's amazing stuff. And then there's All I'm Thinking About, which is, to me, just like a nice little ditty. But again, it's still that finding a home in the arms of another one. It fits a light reprieve because of the heaviness of the hitter and then the heaviness of Madame Morris Banks, which closes the album in a real heavy way. Although because Bruce tells the story backwards,
Right.
the story ends with hope, right? Because he's at that point, he's on the other side, still hoping and longing to find home, right? Again, it's that search for home, which keeps coming up again and again in all these songs.
And what I love these imagery you've talked about. Bruce in the concert talked about that was a friend of Patty's that
Hmm.
he wrote Silver Palomino for their
Yeah,
sons because she had lost her battle, and he wrote the song for the two boys. Highway Patrolman is as good a written song and telling a story as is out there.
agreed.
But the
Yeah,
hitter tells that story too. You know that this is a young man who maybe isn't so young anymore, who's made a lot of bad choices,
yeah,
and he's hurt his parents
yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
And the idea just, hey, Ma, let me rest a little bit.
And it leaves us hanging because it doesn't quite
Right.
resolve. But you're right. There is a repentance and a confession there, right?
Yeah.
There's a step that he's taking to arrive, even if it's just for a little while. Like there's something that he's seeking and searching in his childhood home, maybe, right? And he's back there in that moment, which offers possibility, right? Like she may open the door, right? Maybe
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah. Any thoughts, final thoughts before I get you out of here?
Oh gosh, I think in some way or another, I at least very briefly touched each of the songs. I'm just looking at them now. This is a little bit of a side note, but I got back into vinyl only recently in the last handful of months. So it's interesting. I don't know that it always works because nowadays an album like this, they spread over two records, right? So you
Yeah.
get four sides, right? And when Bruce wrote the song and constructed the order of the songs and all that, he was thinking about all 12, but he might have still been
Yeah.
thinking in sides. I don't know that he was thinking about four sides, but it's interesting now to go back and look at it from those perspectives as well. Reno ends in this format, ends side one, and Maria's Bed ends side two, right? And so
Right.
again, I think there's this connection between those songs. Madam Morris Banks is certainly as a closing song. I've read somewhere, and I think sometimes it's a stretch. It doesn't always happen. More often than not, Bruce's the songs that end his albums give you some glimmer of hope. And here, Madam Morris Banks, a quick blush, you might say, whoa, that's a tough story. But again, he tells it backwards to leave us with hope and possibility. And of course, it's set very much in the Jode fashion with those border songs. It's been called Madam Morris Banks as a sequel to Across the Border, because Across the Border on Jode is more of an aspiration and a
Yes.
dream, right? He's just dreaming about that. Here, he's putting that dream into action, right? And even though it ends seemingly where he doesn't get there, Bruce tells it backwards so that he leaves us on the edge of that bank looking out and wondering, hey, where is home? And can I get there? When that's the same question that the soldier is asking in Devils and Dust. Can I get home from here? And I guess the last thought I'll have is why is Devils and Dust the title track? It's a good metaphor. It sounds good. But I think a lot of albums, and not every one of them, but a lot of them, the title track, if you just heard the title, you could develop a story that encapsulates the whole record, right? And that there it is. Devils and Dust, again, is the things, the dust is us. And these are the consequences of that untenable choice between that the soldier has and that all the characters have, right? And can they find their way home? So I'm going to keep listening to this album this week, Jesse.
I think when I heard Western Stars, I thought, God, this reminds me a lot of Devils and Dust. It reminds me a lot of Nebraska.
Mm,
And because they feel like collections of short stories,
yeah.
and some dark and some not. Yeah, absolutely. I have a feeling I want to go put it on right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm the guy that, and listen, I'm not going to say I prefer, but I would put like my excitement over if I knew I was going to see Bruce in a theater with just a guitar tomorrow be on the same level as knowing that I'm going to see him in the band. I just love him in that format. I know he's going to go, as he said, till the wheels turn off. And I think that's more of a band comment, but when he's only comfortable sitting on a stool, if he could do that for a decade at some point,
I'd love it.
I would love it because the Broadway show is the greatest example of that. Just the stories combined with the songs are just incredible. And you get all that on this album. You got that on this tour, including the wonderful thing about the tour, back to the title of your podcast, The Set Lusting, is that Devils and Dust tour was much more diverse in terms of the songs he threw at you than Tom Joad ever was. He did a lot of different things on the piano, the pump organ, while weaving the core of that Devils and Dust album. He threw a lot of things at us, and that was great stuff. But I digress.
No, that was wonderful. Anthony, I can't wait to have you on for another episode. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
I'm on Facebook, right? I am in the Spring Nuts group. I'm a quiet, occasional contributor there. You can get me on email. It's my first initial A, my last name, Pami, Pai, at live.com. That's probably the best way to
Okay.
connect, that or Facebook. And yeah, awesome.
Sounds awesome. Thank you so much. All right,
Yeah, thank you.
listeners, clear your heart, clear your mind, put that CD on, put the streaming on, put the album on, and lose yourself in this album and get lost in these stories. It will do your soul well.
Yeah.
I am at Jesse. Yes, go
Amen.
ahead.
You
I
know,
am at Jesse.
amen.
Yes.
I hope that this podcast will, for what it's worth, which is not much, whenever people put out that list of, hey, my favorite albums, number 1 to 21, Devils and Dust will start rising on the list now.
I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. I'm also Jesse Jackson on Facebook. The podcast does have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com, search for Set Lusting Bruce, and for as little as $1 a month, you can support the podcast. So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining me. This was a blast. We are
Same.
going to have you on again. This is going to be a wonderful time. Listeners, thank you for being on this journey with me. We hope you're having fun. Everyone else, please, listeners, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.